Good evening. I'm Bishop Grigori, and welcome to this edition of the God's Word News Service. Tonight's video is part one of how the Obama-Cruz fraud is destroying the presidency and Constitution of the United States. Unless there is a complete turnaround, America is doomed. It is bad enough that we as a nation have finally caught up with the ancient Roman Empire in our embracing of depravity, acceptance of perversions, immorality, and unethical behavior. But now we are racing headlong toward destroying the office of the President and the Constitution of the United States. Back in the late 1960s and throughout the 1970s, the ongoing mantra of the left was, you can't legislate morality. But they certainly have made great headway and strides in legislating immorality. And what exactly are the values held by the majority of citizens in the United States today, as well as our government? Under today's immoral values, in the nation that was founded on Judeo-Christian moral and ethical values, that until the Obama administration made the United States the once great nation it was, Christians and pro-life and pro-constitutional individuals and or groups are not allowed to be protected from intolerant sodomites and other perverts seeking to force their will upon Christians and all other citizens who simply want to be left alone and free to pursue their religion as they see fit. Individual Christians as well as entire states are being forced to abandon their long-held Christian moral beliefs and values, or face the full fury of the LGBT community, backed up by our now totally corrupt and morally bankrupt government. The leftists have successfully and unconstitutionally managed to gain total control over every important institution in the United States, including our public education system, which has led to the nearly total dumbing down of the American citizens, especially when it comes to the history of the United States, the Constitution, and how our government is supposed to work. At the end of the Revolutionary War, the War of Independence, which brought about the release of the American colonies from under the oppressive boot of the British Crown, our founding fathers set about establishing a new and free sovereign nation by creating a constitution for a representative republic form of self-governance, a government based upon Judeo-Christian moral values, a government by and for we the people. Thus, the United States of America was brought into existence with the passage of the Constitution, the supreme law of this new land. However, almost from the beginning, there were political and other forces, both here and around the world, that set about to eradicate the United States as the world's first and only free nation, the most powerful and prosperous nation the world has ever known. Here we are now, some 200 years later, and as a nation, we seem to be struggling to take our last breaths, beaten down to an almost unrecognizable mess, primarily from inside by our own elected officials, who seem to have turned on their own nation with such a hatred that defies any and all logic. The very people that we have elected to represent us in the seats of power have only one objective, and that is to bring a total end to our constitutional republic and to our national sovereignty, and place us under a one-world global government based on the communist principles of Marxism. Believe it or not, like it or not, the United States of America is now in a life and death struggle for its very existence and sovereignty. It is a struggle, a war, not against an enemy at the gates, but rather against traitors from within, to bring about the demise of the United States by destroying the institution of the presidency and the Constitution, which has almost been accomplished. The only thing standing in the way of the total eradication of the United States is the Constitution and the office of the president. To finish the job, both the presidency and the Constitution need to be destroyed. And what better way to do it than to have the citizens of the United States do it to themselves? So, how is this being accomplished? In 2014, at the Democratic National Convention, Senator Ted Kennedy, who had extremely close ties with the then head of the Russian KGB, Vladimir Putin, foisted upon the American people a completely unknown Illinois state senator to give the keynote address. This unknown senator managed to mysteriously upstage the intended focus of the show, Democrat presidential nominee John Kerry. And before we knew it, in 4 short years, this unknown entity, a man with absolutely no verifiable past, would become the United States' first anti-Constitution and anti-American president and commander-in-chief, occupying the White House through absolute fraud. He is none other than Barack Hussein Obama, also known as Barry Soetoro, also known as Barack Hussein Obama Sobarka. This man was born to a Kenyan father and a young American mother, supposedly in Hawaii, a claim that has yet to be fully verified, and grew up as an Indonesian citizen for a period of time. This mystery man has some 20 or more Social Security numbers attached to his various names. And as of 2016, there isn't even one American citizen who can state with any certainty who or what Obama really is, because his first act as president was to order all of his records sealed and kept from public view. And just days before his inauguration, he stated, quote, "We are just 5 days away from transforming America," end of quote. Nobody, not even the media, bothered to ask what exactly did he mean by transform America. Instead, for nearly 8 years now, the media, Congress, the courts, and unfortunately, we the people, stood by and watched him destroy with lightning speed our nation and shred our Constitution. He created a deep chasm between the races and genders, usurped unconstitutionally more and more dictatorial executive powers, imported illegal aliens, and illegal so-called Islamic refugees at a record pace, all in open violation of the Constitution and his oath of office. He has taken over entire private economic sectors, forcing many businesses to go bankrupt. He has driven our nation to nearly $20 trillion in debt and set all-time records in military killed in action, losing in the process Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, Pakistan, and numerous other Middle Eastern countries, while at the same time undermining every concept of constitutional governance. He has installed Muslim Brotherhood members throughout every one of our federal offices and national security agencies, as well as in numerous Middle Eastern nations by directly interfering in their elections. And for the icing on his cake of destruction, Obama has ditched all of our longtime U.S. allies and replaced them with our longtime enemies, and also placed our oldest Middle Eastern ally, Israel, in the direct line of fire of their enemies. No one has ever done a better job than Barack Hussein Obama to destroy the United States of America. All of this could have been prevented if we, the people, had demanded the enforcement of the Constitution. Our founders and framers of the Constitution gave us the tools, the weapons, to prevent such a disaster from taking place by inserting narrow and very specific requirements for the office of the president, which is found in Article 2 of the Constitution. They, the framers, kept it very simple. To be eligible for the office of president or vice president, one has only to meet the following conditions. 1, the candidate must be a natural-born citizen of the United States, a true citizen. The candidate must be at least 35 years of age, and 3, the candidate must have held U.S. residency for at least 14 years prior. These 3 very simple requirements were established to prevent someone such as Barack Hussein Obama from ever entering the Oval Office, someone with unknown foreign, dual, or divided national loyalties. The fraud occupying the office of president, Barack Obama, has overtly demonstrated to both the American people and the world for nearly 8 years now that his loyalties lie not with the best interest of the United States or the American people, but to the interests and desires of the globalists. Obama may have met conditions 2 and 3, but there is no way possible that he could meet condition 1, the natural-born citizen requirement. It is the condition that should have prevented him from ever setting foot in the People's White House. It didn't stop him because the Congress, the courts, and sadly we the people failed to enforce Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, or even hold their representatives accountable for sitting silent as it happened. But there were millions of Americans who demanded that this constitutional crisis be addressed as well as resolved. Many people filed lawsuits and freedom of information requests for information on who Obama really is and where he really came from. They pleaded for impeachment, both for the fraud that allowed him to seize the White House and the many treasonous acts he committed and is still committing. But all of the demands and pleas and requests fell on deaf ears. And to make matters worse, there were plenty more people, plenty more Americans, who only wanted to focus solely upon removing him from fraudulent power through the election process, totally forgetting the fact that Obama was now in full control of everything, including elections. Meanwhile, in 2012, a young, new, up-and-coming hotshot Republican was emerging in the once very conservative state of Texas. Like Obama, he was a Harvard-trained lawyer with one exception. He actually had more on his resume than the communist community organizer. A GOP Texas State Committee member held an interview with the young candidate during his freshman Senate race to ask a few important vetting questions. The following is a redacted version of the interview. It has been redacted to protect the witness, the interviewer, at this time, but the witness is more than willing to offer sworn testimony when the time comes. Interviewer to Ted Cruz. Quote, "What is your understanding of how one becomes a natural-born citizen?" End of quote. Cruz, quote, "Two citizen parents and born on the soil." End of quote. Interviewer, "Not exactly, but as I don't have enough time to fully explain how one does become a natural-born citizen, based on your understanding, would you agree that Barack Obama is ineligible to be President of the United States?" Cruz, "I would agree." Interviewer, "So when we get you elected, will you expose him for the usurping fraud he is?" Cruz, "No. My main focus will be on repealing Obamacare." Interviewer, "But Mr. Cruz, if he is exposed as the usurping fraud he is, everything he has done will become null and void. Everything." At that point, Cruz reiterated his main concern, so it was obvious the conversation was over as far as Cruz was concerned. I thanked him for his time and wished him success in the runoff. End of interview. Now, Cruz was running to replace Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, who had just retired and vacated her seat. At the originally scheduled time for the primary, Republican Cruz opponent, Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst, was well ahead in the polls. But by the time the election took place, Cruz had had enough time to slip ahead with more name recognition, in the end defeating his opponent and going on to defeat Democrat Paul Sadler in the general election, thus becoming only one of 3 Latinos in the U.S. Senate. But there is a problem with his election to the Senate, which I will discuss shortly. That was 2012. And in July of 2013, Cruz was then sworn in as senator from the state of Texas. Cruz was beginning to make a name for himself, somewhat outspoken freshman senator, sometimes frustrating GOP establishment rhinos like Senator Mitch McConnell, with his on-camera grandstanding, much to the delight of his growing fan base in the Tea Party movement. Now, many members of the Tea Party who were once focused on constitutional government were beginning to get mesmerized and began to see Cruz as more than just a U.S. senator. In their search for a real, true constitutional conservative to help regain control of an out-of-control runaway federal government under the Obama administration. It was the reason that calls for Cruz to seek the office of president in 2016 began to take shape. And that's when Senator Cruz became very concerned about a fact that he knew but had never disclosed to the public, including during his Senate campaign a year earlier. That fact being that he, Ted Cruz, was born a Canadian citizen at birth and remained a legal citizen of Canada all the way up until May 14, 2014. So the problem with his election to the U.S. Senate, which I mentioned, is Ted Cruz was a legal citizen of Canada when he ran for and was sworn in as a U.S. Senator, without ever having disclosed his Canadian citizenship to Texas voters, which, under both Texas and U.S. election law, is an act of fraud. Ted Cruz committed election fraud by failing to disclose to Texas voters that he was a Canadian citizen in 2012. And had he disclosed this to the Texas voters, that he had always been and remained at that time a legal citizen of Canada, his Republican opponent, Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst, might have won that race and become the next U.S. Senator from Texas. It was the Tea Party wave of support that caused Cruz to take an interest in running for president in 2016, forcing Cruz to now deal with the fact that was sure to become public in a presidential campaign, that he was a Canadian citizen.